she was always the one in control, the planner, the mind behind the mission. Shaunie O'Neal didn't just create a name, she built something lasting, a legacy. She turned Basketball Wives into a pop culture success and held her own as Shaquille O'Neal's ex-wife in the public eye. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Whether dealing with public criticism or running a business, Shaunie knew how to handle the heat, move smart, and keep her presence sharp, even when the world got loud. But everything shifted when she married Pastor Keion Henderson. It didn't happen in one dramatic moment. There were no red flags waving in the wind or overnight changes. It began quietly, slowly. The change wasn't obvious at first. On paper, they seemed perfect. He was a spiritual leader with a global platform, and she was a driven businesswoman with 5 children and years of experience in the spotlight. Together, they seemed like a dream couple, full of faith, success, and grace. Their wedding was beautiful. They had an ocean backdrop, a VH1 special, and vows that promised peace and partnership. For a while, it really did feel like peace. After living so much of her life in public conflict, Shaunie wanted something calm, something deeper. She believed she had finally found that place. The arguments and gossip were behind her, and she was ready to build something more meaningful, something rooted in God and purpose. But peace, she learned, can sometimes hide quiet discomfort. On the outside, everything looked wonderful. She was still posting pictures, still attending events, still standing beside her husband, polished and graceful. But behind that smile, something inside her was growing quiet. Not because she was unhappy with him, but because the role she had stepped into slowly started asking her to give up parts of herself. At first, no one noticed. Not her fans, not even her close friends. The changes were small, fewer personal Instagram stories, captions filled with scriptures instead of her own witty tone, smiles that didn't always reach her eyes. Over time, the woman people admired, confident, bold, funny, sometimes even messy, seemed to fade into the background. People assumed she was just getting used to being a pastor's wife. After all, it's a title that carries weight. Being a first lady of a church comes with responsibilities, standards, and the pressure of being watched by an entire congregation. But that's the thing, Shaunie never wanted to be anyone's idea of perfect. She wasn't made for pretending. And yet, more and more, that's what the role demanded. Pretending she was okay when she felt confused. Pretending she was energized when she was emotionally exhausted. Pretending to fit into a mold that was never shaped for her to begin with. It wasn't Keion's fault, not directly. He never asked her to become someone else. But the life that came with him, the expectations, the appearances, the constant performance, started to drain her. She began feeling like she was shrinking, slowly, from the inside out. Being married to a pastor didn't just make her a wife, it made her a symbol, a role model, a mirror reflecting someone else's idea of favor and faith. And although that sounded beautiful, it often meant sacrificing her voice, her individuality, her identity. For a woman who fought her whole life to stand tall, that kind of sacrifice cuts deep. She held it together as long as she could. For the image, for the church, for the love she truly believed was meant to last. But love, no matter how holy it appears, can't survive on appearance alone. It needs space. It needs truth. It needs room for flaws. And slowly, Shaunie was running out of air. What made it harder was how invisible she began to feel, not just to the public, but to her own husband. Keion loved her, no doubt. But he seemed to love the version of her that fit his vision, his dream, his ministry. That subtle difference, though never spoken out loud, made Shaunie question everything. Was she really at peace? Or was she just in a quiet kind of pain? Was she his partner, or was she performing again? There wasn't one big argument that made her wake up. No scandal, no betrayal. Just one quiet conversation on a late night with a longtime friend. A friend who knew her before the shows, the fame, and the pressure. They sat across from each other in a quiet room. No makeup, hair wrapped, hoodie pulled tight. And then came the question, "Are you still happy?" Shaunie didn't have an answer. Just silence. A deep, heavy pause that said everything her lips couldn't. She did love Keion, but she couldn't deny that something inside her felt missing. Like she'd lowered her own voice to keep everything else loud and polished. Like she was showing up for everything except herself. She began journaling again. It had been years since she'd written down her feelings, probably not since her divorce from Shaq. But now, every late night between events or church visits, she wrote honestly. No filters, just feelings. She wrote about feeling unseen while everyone around her celebrated her husband. About smiling through events that left her heart empty. About how the same church that was supposed to help her grow felt like another space where she couldn't fully be herself. And then one night, she wrote something that changed everything. I used to walk into a room and know exactly who I was. Now, I walk in and wonder who they need me to be. Reading that sentence back to herself broke something open. This wasn't just about her marriage. It was about identity. About a slow loss of self, not because of love, but because of expectations. Everyone was asking about babies, businesses, and ministry plans. But no one was asking how she felt. And even she didn't know how to answer that anymore. When you spend your life being strong, it becomes hard to admit when you feel weak. When you're known for being unbothered, saying, "I'm not okay," can feel impossible. Then came the church women's conference. Shaunie was invited to speak, and the room was packed. Everyone expected the usual, a polished message about strength, faith, and godly love. But what they got instead was honesty. She stood on the stage, looked around the crowd, and stayed silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Sometimes God's plan comes wrapped in pressure, and we don't realize we're being crushed until we're already broken." The room fell silent. You could hear sniffles before anyone clapped. Some called her brave. Others said she went too far. But for the first time in a long time, Shaunie spoke her truth without trying to dress it up. That moment changed her not because the world noticed, but because she finally stopped hiding. There was no official announcement, no press release, no cryptic Instagram caption, just a quiet moment on a podcast with a friend who had known her forever. No lights, no makeup, just raw honesty. And then she said it. "I stopped dreaming for myself." The room went still. You could almost feel the weight lift off her chest. She wasn't angry, just exhausted. Exhausted from constantly bending, shifting, and adjusting. Tired of becoming what others needed while forgetting what she needed. Her voice cracked as she continued. "I became his answered prayer. But I stopped being mine." That one line broke the internet. People shared it, talked about it. Women from all walks of life reached out, saying they had felt the same thing but never had the words. This wasn't about cheating. It wasn't a scandal. It was emotional erosion, a quiet wearing down who she was while the world praised who she appeared to be. Keion hadn't harmed her. He hadn't yelled or disrespected her. But he hadn't truly seen her either. Not the way she needed. He loved her image, her power, her ability to show up. But he missed the signs, the quiet fading of her sparkle, the loneliness behind her smile. And that, more than anything, is what hurt. Shaunie tried everything to hold on to herself. She prayed, went to therapy, wrote, fasted. She looked for answers in God, in Scripture, in herself. But peace didn't come from a sermon. It came from a whisper. You don't have to disappear to be loved. That was the truth she needed. She wasn't ready to walk away from her marriage. She still believed in the love, still respected her husband. But she had to step back, not from the relationship, but from the performance. From pretending, from the version of herself that was always camera ready, always composed, always pleasing. She started saying no. No to events that drained her. No to roles that didn't feel real. No to perfection. And little by little, she came back to life. The glow returned, not all at once, but slowly, a smile that felt real. A laugh that came from deep inside, not just her throat. A decision to create again not for approval, but for joy. People around her saw it. And while Keion remained silent publicly, maybe that silence said more than words could. Maybe he too was reflecting. Nobody knows what comes next. But one thing is certain, Shaunie is no longer waiting for permission to exist fully. She's reclaiming herself not as someone's wife or someone's example, but as her own woman. She's not chasing perfection anymore. She's choosing peace, her peace. And that, right there, is what makes Shaunie O'Neill's story so powerful. She didn't walk away with a dramatic exit or break the internet with a scandal. She simply chose herself quietly, honestly, and with purpose. After years of building an empire, raising her children, and surviving life in the spotlight, she found herself facing a new kind of challenge, staying true to who she is in a life that quietly asked her to become someone else. Shaunie's journey isn't about divorce or drama, it's about rediscovery. It's about what happens when a woman who spent her life being strong finally admits she's tired of performing, tired of shrinking to fit into roles that no longer reflect her soul. It's about walking away from the version of peace that's just silence and stepping into the kind that's rooted in truth. She didn't blame anyone. She didn't point fingers. She just spoke her truth, and in doing so, she gave voice to thousands of women who felt the same way but never knew how to say it out loud. So whether you're a fan, a follower, or someone who just stumbled across this story, remember this: you don't have to disappear to be loved. You don't have to perform to be worthy. Shaunie isn't chasing applause anymore. She's walking in alignment with or without the titles, with or without the spotlight. And maybe, just maybe, that's what true power really looks like. If you felt this, drop a comment, share your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe. This journey isn't over and we'll be right here following every step. Until next time, stay real, stay grounded, and most of all, stay true to you.